Welcome to MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. I'm Rebecca Viola, and this demonstration is called Hand Lettering Comics. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor for this program, Albertine Press, a design and letterpress print shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In addition to their stationery store, Albertine Press offers custom greeting cards, note sets, coasters, journals, and hosts workshops. This year, Albertine is offering a mice lettering pen pack for purchase through their website. The pens were selected by our workshop instructor, and he'll be using them in the demonstration today. If you're interested, there are still some pen sets available. And thanks to all our arts advocates. These are major contributors who help sustain mice and allow the show to grow year after year. MICE is produced by the Boston Comic Arts Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization that funds comics arts festivals, individual artists, and educational programs for the greater Boston community. If you like what we're doing here, please consider making a donation today by using the donate button in this session. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button labeled Ask a Question. Please use that button to ask or vote up any questions you may have throughout the session. This workshop is pre-recorded, but Kurt will be here live to answer questions at the end. You'll see that there's a chat box to the right-hand side of your screen. Let's have everyone introduce themselves. What's your name and your age? We'd love to know who we're drawing with today. We will be streaming the session to our Facebook page, facebook.com/MICEXPO, for audience members who would like to use the automatic closed captioning function that Facebook Live offers. And now I'd like to introduce our instructor, Kurt Ankeny. He is an award-winning cartoonist and painter in Salem, Massachusetts, whose work has appeared in Best American Comics, the Society of Illustrators, the Cape Ann Museum, Comics Workbook, PEN America's Illustrated Pen, Inkbrick, and Fantagraphics Now anthology. He's the author of 2 graphic novels, Pleading with Stars and In Pieces. And he is the letterer for the Image Comics series November by Matt Fraction and Elsa Charretier. Okay, now we'll go to Kurt.
Hello, my name is Kurt Ankeny, and I am doing a hand lettering workshop here today at MICE. I am the author of the book In Pieces, which was self-published, and I am also the author of the book Pleading with Stars, which was out from Ad House last year. And I am also, and this is a little more pertinent to our discussion here, I'm also the letterer on Matt Fraction and Elsa Charretier's November. So I've been doing that for the last year or so. Just finished up the final volume, and the 3rd volume is out soon. So I want to talk to you about hand lettering, and that means lettering with pens and paper. And of course, obviously, you need to digitize as well. This particular workshop will not cover the digitizing section of that. It will just cover the actual lettering and the principles behind, which you can apply to any sort of lettering you want to do, honestly. So let's get started with a little discussion of the tools. Now, some of you may have purchased the kit from Albertine Press, which we just assembled as a way for you to have some tools in case you had no idea what to letter with. And so we assembled that kit, including the following items. So we have these Mitsubishi Uni POSCA pens in 1.3 millimeter bullet-shaped tip in both white and black. We have a 0.7 millimeter Uni POSCA pens in also white and black. We have a Kuretake brush pen. This is not what I would consider an actual brush pen. This is actually like a felt tip pen with a very long felt pointed tip on it. So not quite a brush pen, but still useful. And then we also had the Sakura Gelly Roll pens in 0.8 and 0.8 in both black and white. these are one of my favorite tools for lettering because the ink is very consistent. They're easy to write with and sort of fit the modern handwriting style better than say a dip pen does. And I believe they're waterproof when they're done. The white covers well. Can't say enough good things about these. I really do like these. But again, the thing about tools is you can use whatever you want. In November, I also used the classic Bic pen to get a certain effect, and a Pilot Fineliner is a classic felt tip pen, which is very useful. Nice lines to it. Definitely ones like this were used in the past by letterers of all stripes because they were just faster and easier. Alex Toth famously used felt tip pens like this for almost all of his letters. So anyway, we have those. The other things you need are these white pens are all excellent for little corrections. When you need to do a bigger area of correction, dropping stuff, I suggest acrylic wash. This is obviously black and you would need white, but I'm currently out of white, so this is Holbein's acrylic wash. It's an acrylic paint, but it's matte and it covers really well. It's opaque, so that's a nice thing to use for corrections. The other thing that you can use is that Golden, and maybe Liquitex as well, but Golden is now currently making a matte acrylic, and this is the titanium weight. So these could be used for bigger areas of corrections if you need to do it on your page. And of course, you know, let's not kid ourselves. We can also do corrections in Photoshop if need be. The other things you need for basic lettering tools, you need a ruler of some sort. This is my clear ruler. A pencil is useful, especially if you're going to rule out the lines. Now, if you don't have anything fancy whatsoever, ruling with a pencil and a ruler to get your guidelines is easy. You could use an Ames guide. That's really for speed because you can just sort of swipe back and forth. If you've never used one before, we're not going to get into it. But basically, you turn the dial to the width of the lines that you want, and then you can use your ruler. You set it on top of your ruler, and you put the pencil point in one of the holes, and you slide it back and forth as you go. You change the holes, and it makes a series of lines down the page. That's how you use it. We're not going to talk about it, other than that quick discussion. But what I have found is very useful is a lightbox. Just for me, for my ease of use, is a lightbox and a sheet of acetate like this, which I've pre-printed. These are 2mm lines because that's what I was using on the lettering for November because I was lettering at size. But you could do whatever. You could do this in a series of different sizes for whatever scale you needed, and you know, have it printed down here what scale it was. I basically just made one of these in Illustrator. Just put a bunch of lines down an 8.5 by 11 document, and then had staples printed up for me on a piece of transparency. So that's easy enough, and very useful if you're doing stuff, doing a lot in a short amount of time. Other tools that it's useful to have. I'm trying to think. A light box is useful if you're going to do this for any length of time. I have one of those big LED panels, which is very nice, and they're pretty cheap. They are kind of made very cheaply, so you have to kind of beware. But, you know, unfortunately, the only source I've ever seen for them is Amazon. I'm sure you could get them at your local art stores as well. And so let's talk then about some basic letter forms and how we use and how we shape the letters on the page. All right? Okay, so let's talk about letter forms. Letter forms are basically just the shapes of your letters. They usually have, let's say we have a letter H here. You have your main, your stem, which is your main stroke, up and down. And I'm sure you all remember from grade school in handwriting or however that works, these little guidelines. Here, all right. So our letter H continues over with an arc. These are the feet. This is the baseline. This is most frequently known as the X height, which is the height of the X, basically. That's where the X comes from, the X goes to. And the reason it's the X is because the X is the most square-like, and it's also the one in fonts, the round letters tend to go above and below these lines just slightly. So this one is the most consistent letter for this height. All right. This part is the ascender because it ascends above the X height. And let's turn this O into a G. This is a descender because it descends below the baseline. Those are your basic parts. One of the things that we frequently will play with in lettering, especially hand lettering, is the stem. The stem of a letter is sort of the part that gives the overall rhythm to your writing. So if I've got a series of letters that go like this, that's a very different feel than a series of letters that go like this, that follow this rhythm. And it's even more different than a series of letters that follow an even more extreme slant like this. Okay, so this up and down angle is the key thing when we talk about rhythm. And rhythm in lettering is really the thing that makes, calligraphy and other forms of handwriting so beautiful, because they follow that same rhythm. And anybody who cares about their lettering generally will try to follow that rhythm. But there's sort of an evenness to the spacing, there's an evenness to the slant of the letters, and that's where we start to build a good handwriting font. So those are your basic tools, and basically when you're making a handwriting font or a hand lettering font, you're developing your hand lettering style, you can do whatever you like as long as you do two things. One is that you make your letter forms clear and distinct from each other. So one of the things that is tricky is H's, N's, M's, U's. All those things have such similar shapes that if you're not careful, they can sort of run into a big blob that's hard for somebody who's not you to discern. So you want to make sure that your letter forms are relatively distinct. So some Some people will compact this a little bit. They'll make this a little bit rounder, and then this is this is upside down, but making sure that the stem doesn't go above the X height, and making sure that your stem for your H does go quite a bit above your X height. These little things are things that will help help your letter forms be distinct, be clear, and be easily legible. One of the other things that you run into if you're a proponent, as I am, of writing with upper and lower case, letters, is if you're making a bunch of text, these descenders and these ascenders can start to get tangled. So oftentimes hand letterers will make the ascenders very short, distinctive but very short, and then you just have to make sure that you have enough space in between your lines to compensate for those things that are going to go up and down. Or alternatively, if you are good enough, you can just sort of, when you write your words, and I'm doing a very sloppy job here, but went to the store. Now this is an extreme example, but you see how I've, and you probably couldn't get away with this in mainstream comics, but you can see how the descender comes down and sort of splits this line, and this line just sort of avoids it. You don't want to do anything this extreme, but that's basically the principle, is that if you just time your ascenders and descenders so that they don't quite line up, you can get away with them slightly overlapping. All right? Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so those are the basic letter forms, and one thing I forgot to finish saying in that last little bit was that the second thing that you need to do to make any sort of style into a good handwriting font is that your letter shapes must be consistent, in that like all of your H's should look the same and all of your Y's should look the same. You shouldn't do two different, when we do our handwriting, oftentimes we do different variations based on whatever we've learned over the years of our education. But you have to sort of knock off those rough edges and make them as consistent as possible, so that people aren't suddenly confused when you write one slightly differently and they think maybe it's a new letter. So let's talk about decision making and acting and other good practices for when you're composing letters on a page for over somebody's work, your work or someone else's. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some of the decision-making things you need to do when you are lettering a comic. So let's say you have a panel like such. And you've got a character who's giving an important bit of dialogue here, and they're not only are they talking and angry about something, but they're also making this great hand gesture that the artist or yourself has taken a lot of time to draw out. So when you're, let's pretend this is our whole comics page, and we've got our panels, different sizes and shapes. Generally, because English reads left to right, we want to start here and end here with the visual flow. And the same thing applies to the panels. You want to start in the upper hand corner and finish in this corner, or whatever. You need to work with the art that's in the dialogue, but in general, you're going this way or you're going this way. You're leading to the next panel, across, and to the next panel, and then across, and to the next panel, and out, right? This is basic comics flow. That's what you need, that's what you're trying to do. So each individual panel needs to try and meet that whole goal overall. So this panel, let's say that this this writer has decided that I'm going to use here this just for our rough draft here, that our character is saying, I really want a ham and pickle sandwich. And I want it now. And the writer has indicated in the dialogue that that should be emphasized, right? So you've got two bits of dialogue you need to place in here. So generally, the one thing that is good practice is to fill in this area up here, all of this. There we go, get some paint going in there. All of this area up here, this part that I'm coloring in blue, or turquoise, or whatever you want to call it. This color. All of that area is kind of your first choice for dialogue real estate, right? You want to try and fit everything up there if possible, just because there's no important background details. The figure is occupying down here, so this is your free zone. You can do whatever you want in this area. But when you've got enough dialogue that it doesn't fit in here, then you've got some hard choices, because even if you're writing pretty small, I really want a ham and pickle sandwich. Even if you're writing that small, this width, which is about that wide, doesn't fit in there. See, it's going to overlap her face because it's going to come all the way out to here. And I've got paint on my hand. While I clean that up, so then your choices become more difficult. One of the issues here is that you've got this lovely hand gesture that you don't want to cover. So in this case, my choice, even though it's not your optimal choice, but my choice would be to put it here across the body or to this side of the body, so that you've got the head is always sacrosanct in comics. And the hands are close second, especially when they're making an important gesture. So this area here is pretty good for a compromise, since what you want to put in here isn't really going to fit in this area without being really cramped looking and doing one of those things like they used to do in the older comics, where they'd sort of cram it right here, like the dialogue balloon would take up all this space and sort of silhouette the thing, and say, I really want a ham. And you see, because I don't even have space for and here, pickle, barely fitting that in here, send, and then I've got a hyphenate, which, right, that doesn't work at all. It's too big for the area. So we'll put it in here. We'll put it like this. Okay, and so this is wider, as you can see, than up here. But if you measure, it's about like that, and it fits right here. But the other key thing is that it only takes up this much depth, so it's going to take up this little block, which I'll outline in this pink area. So it's going to take up this area here, which isn't ideal. Like I said, it's not ideal, but it leaves the face, and it leaves the hands, and it leaves most of the gesture intact. And then for our second line, and I want it now, we can put it down here. And we can tuck it into the corner and connect them here, like this. And now we've still kept it away from the hands. We've connected it here, but we've allowed this to read and this to read, and the body gets covered, unfortunately, but really there's no other place for it, right? So it's a lot of times, unless you've got a person who does their own lettering a lot, and knows exactly how much space you're going to need, which is really rare, you'll have to occasionally make choices like this. But those types of choices are placement and reading order and visual space. So you want them to follow this reading order. You want to pay attention to which visual spaces are the most important, and you want to fit the dialogue in as written. You know, part of the issue when you've got a writer and a artist working separately is that the writer will sometimes want more dialogue that can fit in the panel, or the artist will make choices that don't leave quite enough room for the dialogue, even though, you know, every good artist is obviously thinking of the lettering and trying to leave space, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't exactly work, and then you have to make slightly strange choices like this, but there's still the ideal choice for the situation you've been given. What else? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is acting, and I want to get into this bit real quickly. As we were talking about in the last bit of about letter forms, we're talking about those rhythms, that rhythm of the letters and the letter forms within a dialogue balloon. And so let me draw a dialogue balloon here. right? You have several things you can play with when you're working with hand lettering especially. And you can do this digitally as well, but it's easier and faster, and to my mind seems more intuitive when you're doing it by hand. But you've got the balloon shape, the tail shape, and the letter shapes within to play with, right? So those three things. Balloon shape, grade school French has forever ruined my ability to spell balloon. So you've got balloon shape, number 1. You've got tail shape, number 2. And you've got the letter shapes. And just some quick examples, like even without words, right? So, that dialogue balloon is very different in feel than this dialogue balloon, right? Because you've got, you know, your slant of your letters here is like this, and your slant of your letters here is more like this. You've got that, you know, that leaning of the letter forms that gives more urgency and gives like a visual speed to the letters. And then you've got a very even sort of keel here. You've got your tail, which is not, you know, it's sort of taking its time. This one, you've got, not only do you have a more oval letter balloon, you've got a stiff and sort of direct tail to it. And your letter forms are not only at more of a slant, they're also more broken up. And then you've got a last word that's, or last phrase that's very emphasized. So you've got, you can see how you start to play with those ideas of emotion and acting just by the shapes of these balloons, the tails, and the letter forms themselves, okay? Completely abstracted, but you can see the difference, the clear difference between those two things, right? And even you know, on the other extreme, we can do a very, very sleepy balloon, and the letters sort of meandering around. Right? Okay, so you've got this arc of urgency that you can give to the acting within the balloons just by the way that you write the letters, the way that you write the word balloons and the tails. You know, and you can work out your own visual shorthand. I mean, there's lots of different shapes and forms that you can use to emphasize these in different ways. But this is, you know, so your basic, less fancy ways of adding a lot of character to another layer of character to the words that the writer has already given you. Okay, so next I'm going to do a little bit on sound effects, and then I will do a quick demo, and then I'll take some questions. All right, so let's talk about some sound effects stuff. These pens are going to come in handy now, because in the sound effects, what we are trying to do is we are trying to, and I also like a proper brush pen more like these. What you can see is, the difference between this and the one that I was saying is not quite a brush pen, is that these ones are actually made out of fibers, as you can see me here, and it's an actual brush made out of nylon rather than a felt tip that is just long and pointed, which gives some of the effects of a brush, but it's not exactly a brush pen. Anyway, this big one here is a bullet point. That's a felt tip, so it gives you a pretty smooth, steady line. It will give you a bit of jitter when you're doing it fast, because the ink can't come out fast enough, so that's useful. This one is a plastic pointed tip, and this one's interesting because one of the things that this one can do, especially because it's a paint-based pen, is when you're writing with it, it comes out pretty good, but if you do it against the grain, you will often get a little bit of a spatter, and that can be useful if you can see there, you get a little bit of a spatter when you're sort of pressing hard and abusing it, and that can be useful for your sound effects as well. And then this one also is a good tip. This one is not quite as dense as these, because this is a black paint and this is just an ink. But this one, the one thing I like about this one is that it gets jittery and streaky really quickly, and it also has quite a range. It has a good range of fine to thick, so those are all useful. But your basic idea when you are doing sound effects, is you want to, at least for me, you either want the sound effect to just add unobtrusively to the scene. So if you've got, like, say somebody sets down a book and the writer wants you to emphasize that sound of it hitting the table, and you just do a little thunk or whatever. You want them to be small and sort of unobtrusive. So they add a little bit of atmosphere, but they're not, like, you wouldn't, it's a very different thing to put a little thunk and to do a thunk, because this is much more melodramatic. And if you're not hitting the tone that the writer wants you to hit, then you're not following the tone of the story. So there's the unobtrusive stuff, thunk, and then the other thing that you want to do is you want to have your letters have some of the character of the sound. So I don't know if you saw in my little handout there, semidolus I wrote on there, and it's a word I made up. But basically it means that something should look, it should visually mimic something else, and I couldn't actually find a word that really meant that, and so I made one up. Anyway, you can use it, but you won't find it in the dictionary, and it's and basically, so like let's say we've got a little car over here. The writer has given us a scene where there's a car in the distance and it explodes, right? Sorry, I've been doing a noir lately, so these types of things are in my mind. So let's see. So here's our little car on the side of the road. Maybe there's a building here. You get the picture. Building, car. So one of the things that is helpful, and especially when you're doing your own comics, because in your own comics, you can choose to not repeat efforts, right? So if somebody is drawing this separately and you're adding the sound effects, your job is to enhance whatever they've drawn, right? To enhance, not detract if possible. But if you're drawing and writing and doing the sound effects and everything yourself, then what you can do is you can make that sound effect turn into the visual, and especially for for a sound effect like this one, which is, you know, very fun. You know, you can add those letters in a way that mimics the sort of shape that you would make for an explosion, and it emphasizes not only the sound, but it adds something visually, and it really, you know, to me, this is what comics do best. Is they merge the functions of images as text, you know, text images, which, you know, all were originally pictograms, and images as visual shorthand, you know, representations of what we see with our eyes. So if you can find that that balance, then I find that your sound effects are going to be interesting. So generally, there's two things that I think most sound effects are going to try and visually mimic. One is sound waves. You know, think of the old classic movie. You know, I feel like this is a cliche, and yet I can't think of an example of where it happens. But say there's a movie where the phone rings, and the letters are, you know, these are like it's like the old black and white horror movies where they do the trailers and they'd put hand painted letters over, you know, superimposed over the film footage, and you'd get stuff like this where you have like a phone ringing, and the ring that it says would be warbly like a telephone, like an old-fashioned bell telephone ring. So there's that, which is mimicking sound waves, right? Then the other thing that you can mimic is force, right? So force, you know, that's part of this. I mean, this is kind of a force because it's going up and out. But it's also kind of mimicking sound waves because I'm you know, making all these letter shapes very round in order to mimic that shock wave of an explosion. But one of the things that like say you were to have something splintering, and you've seen this, you know, many times, is, you know, you make the sound effect splintery by making it bits of broken and solid pieces. Right, and I would even, with this one, I would then go in and take that flat part out of the A so that it, you know, if I have space and whatnot. But, you know, all those points add to the visual sound and feel of a sound effect. Okay, so you get that basic idea. It's usually either sound waves or force, and you're trying to make them visually mimetic to whatever you're trying to describe. All right. Okay, let's do a quick demo of Opaque. Okay, so let's do a little sample page here. I've got some art from one of the books I've been doing. This will not be the dialogue from this, but I'm just going to show you an example. So I've got the art at the bottom, you can see. I've got then the printed out lined sheet here, the acetate, the transparency, and then this is just a regular piece of bond paper. I am using, and I have been using for the November series, this Platinum Preppy fountain pen. It's very fine, it writes pretty nicely, and it gives a very fine tip. I would usually prefer to use the Gelly Roll pen, but this, because I was doing at size and because they wanted the writing, the text pretty small, I went with this one. So this is the pen I've been using on this project, so I'll continue with that. And this here is my lightbox. It's you know, maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, and it's quite large, but it wasn't very expensive. I'm gonna turn it on. You can see I have a bit general. I got, you know, not a ton of detail, but this line art is very nice and bold, and so this is, of course, the work of Elsa. And so I'm gonna look through these panels. So here we've got panel 1. We've got a character, and she's let's make up some dialogue for her. Okay, I'm gonna start up here again. This is you know, sort of the sweet spot. You want to be up here if possible. Makes sense for people to be able to read it. It doesn't cover up any critical elements of the story. So and here we've got another character sort of brooding in the dark. She's got her hand up. And so now here, this character, their head is placed further up in the panel here, as you can see. And so I don't have the space up here to put dialogue. But down here is, there's no hands. And this is, it's not throwaway, but you get the gist of the panel without seeing, you know, everything down here. It's not critical information for the reader to be confused. So I'm gonna put dialogue down here. And you can see where I've made this side of the balloon a little bit too sharp, so I'll redo it here a little bit. And I've also made this not quite big enough for the little white space, so I'll make it a little thicker and I'll come back in and clean it up. But you can also see the principle that I'm using. I'm emphasizing this, and it's capitalized, but I'm also playing a lot with the slant of the letters to give that force to the dialogue. So you can see that the slant of the letters gets stronger and stronger as she gets over to this part of the dialogue. So here we've got all three characters, and they're looking at something. And I've pushed this balloon into the corner. Where it's only covering some black space, and it allows all of the elements that the artist has put in there to be visible and doesn't crowd anything, you see? And this is a big splash page, and so what you want to do is, for this, there's not a ton of dialogue here. It's often about the visual impact, and so even though it's a big splash page, unless there's a ton of dialogue that you can't fit in and you need to use up a lot of visual space, you want to keep it small and out of the way so that the visual impact is the first thing, and then the character reaction is secondary. All right, so that's what we'd have. The only other thing that I would do before scanning would be to mark off the edges of the panel borders so that I know how to size it when I scale it up. And then I would turn off my thing and get my white pens out here. Test right on there. And this is going to run into a little problem with some of these inks that want to bleed through the white. But usually after one layer, you can go back over and correct. All right. And that's it. All right, well, I will take some questions now for as long as the good folks are able to give us, and ask away.
Great, and now it's time for some Q&A. Our first question is, what can artists do to make a letterer's job easier?
That's a good question. Uh, Basically, I think one of the things that would be great is if you've never made a comic completely on your own before, you know, do that so that you're doing both the art and the lettering and you sort of know what's involved. And I think that just that basic practice will help you understand what the letterer is doing and has to do, and the decisions that you have to make, and the balance that you have to make when you're deciding to cover up some art or putting the information. So yeah, just leave space and do it a couple of times yourself. I think that helps a lot. Oh, am I,
Sorry. How big or small do you do your lettering compared to the final print size?
for this for November, I did it um, basically at print size. I was concerned that if I shrunk it, that there would be problems getting legibility. If I wrote it bigger and then shrunk it, that it would be problematic. So I just did it at size so that I knew that I was getting legibility. But I often will letter on my own work, and that gets shrunk sometimes. So it just depends on the piece.
Okay, our next question is, do you prefer artists to make the decisions about where to leave the spaces for lettering? Or do you, as the letterer, want to be part of that decision making before they ink the final art?
I mean, I think most professional uh, comics artists are aware enough of leaving space for a letterer. I'm sure there are people out there that are more difficult to work with because they tend to fill everything. But generally, if you've come up with comics and you've been in comics and drawn comics for a while, um, one of the basic things that people know is you got to leave space for the text because it's words and pictures, and if you don't have both, then you've got either a silent comic or you've got a problem. So generally, I think it would, for me personally, I think it would be kind of a logistical nightmare to be in on the process, and also like a little bit too messing with the artist's bit. I feel like if you've got somebody who is a trusted person, is a trusted artist, then you should just let them do their bit. And then if you get to something that's very, very problematic, then maybe you can have them redraw a panel or something. But most of the time, it's something you can get around. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be in that stage of it. I think that'd be too complicated.
Do you have any suggestions on when end of the line hyphenation might be useful and how to use it in those cases?
Yeah, it can be useful, especially if you've got like one or two large words in a little word balloon. And one of the problems is that you'll get like a series of small words and then one large one, and that throws off the balloon because the large one needs a lot of space, but the little ones can be stacked nicely. Um, and in that case, it's good to sort of hyphenate sometimes if it it's also a question of whether you need the space, or if you have the space to let it out longer, or if you need it to be more compact, side to side. um, and the only advice I would say is get your Strunk and White or your Chicago Manual of Style, go to look at your dictionary so that you know where the syllables are, because you don't want to hyphenate where it's not supposed to be hyphenated.
You talked about writers wanting to fit more than what's practical. What advice would you give writers about words per panel or per page as a general guide?
Um, I know there's some general guides out there. I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, and I don't know that I've ever. The thing that's an issue is that it completely depends on what's in the art, and it also depends on how many panels per page. One of the things that's made working on November tricky is that Matt has been using a 12-panel grid, and not always, but there are several pages where there's a full 12-panel grid, and that makes the panels not only small, but it also makes them narrow, and so the space is at a premium. Matt has actually gone back in and rewritten some things because they didn't fit or because they were covering up too much stuff. So that's a possibility. But otherwise, I think, you know, you have to rein yourself in. The thing that I always, as a writer, as an author myself, I always try and think of the comics as the text and the dialogue as poetry. You know, you want it to be condensed, you want it to be effective, you don't want it to go on and on. There's a very different set of priorities in comics versus prose writing, and so you want those few words that you have on the page to be impactful and not to just go on and on because you like the way the words are strung together, you know. So
Okay, our next question is, when is a font built and used from someone's handwriting versus every letter being handwritten?
well, it's I guess it depends on whether or not that person wants to do it by hand or not. Oftentimes, the thing that I see most often is what will happen is if something gets put into translation into another country and it's been hand lettered to start with, that they will either hire somebody who can mimic their hand lettering work, or they will make a font out of that person's handwriting and use it then. But there's not like really a rule as to when that's done. It's just personal preference for people that like the look of their hand lettering but don't want to do all the work anymore. But for me, I think you lose a lot when you turn it into a computer font, because the things you can do by hand easily are much more difficult to replicate in the computer.
And our last question is, how much time do you end up spending on correcting errors?
Correcting errors, like I did at the end of the demo, I'm assuming. It's, maybe a couple minutes per page. It's not usually a huge amount. I do a rough draft first, so I take the original art and I write on it, usually with a red pen, so that I've solved most of the placement and grouping issues on the page before I go to the final. So when I go to the final, there's the only corrections I'm making are if I, misdraw a balloon or if I make a spelling mistake. So the errors at that stage are pretty minimal.
Okay. All right, that's it for our Q&A.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you coming to see the demo.
To order Kirk's graphic novel from Ad House Books, please find a link on our website by clicking the button on your screen. This session is part of the month of Mice, a month of free comics programs, including panel discussions and workshops. If you liked this session, you should check out Portfolio Rescue for Comic Artists next Sunday at 7 p.m. For a full list of sessions, please visit micexpo.org or click that button again. And check out our fundraising raffle, where you can win cool prizes like the Mice lettering pen set from Albertine that Kurt used today and fancy drawing paper from Swarthmore. Tickets are just $1. I hope to see some of you back here at 7 p.m. for our digital coloring demonstration using Clip Studio Paint. Thank you.